You might let me know when there's 3 minutes left.
Yeah.
I have two issues. The first issue is to carry on with the expenses system issue, if I can, first of all. But if you can let us know, Chair, when there's 3 minutes left. And welcome to all of our witnesses. Can you first of all confirm for me, Mr. Barry, who in the Institute would have responsibility for financial controls in relation to their robustness in the first instance, and then compliance with financial rules in relation to the expenses system?
Well, I'm the president of the university, so I'm the accounting officer for everything that happens in the university.
So at the highest level it would be yourself, and then when you go below that in terms of the day-to-day management of the financial controls, who would that be, or who, not the individuals, but the positions that they hold?
Well, the Director of Finance reports directly to me, and he is the person that I rely on in these matters.
The Director of Finance is Mr. Field.
Mr. Field.
And then below Mr. Field it would be...
I'll ask Mr. Field.
Yeah. So, given that your question is specifically about expenses, expense claims can arise from any part of the university. Obviously, any employee can make an expense claim. So, in terms of policy, each employee of the university is obliged to follow our travel and subsistence policy in the making of a claim. So, the first step in the making of a claim is that an employee, having incurred expenses in the course of their duties, will prepare a claim. The process then is their supervisor signs off on that claim. They would be aware that they would be travelling or whatever. And the claim then, once approved by the supervisor, it flows into finance then. And within finance, the first port of call is the expenses administrator. And that was the post which was held previously by Person A. The expenses administrator will check the claim has been approved and is in accordance with policy. And then within our finance department, we have a structure depending on where the claim originates. Like, is it related to research? Is it related to the recurrent budget? Is it over a certain value? That will determine who signs off on it within finance.
Okay, so there would be a role then, and I understand that from the person who makes the claim right up, and then ultimately it would be yourself as the Director of Finance. But would the financial controller also have a role in relation to making sure that there is proper financial controls in place?
Yeah, such like in an individual claim, I would not have any involvement in terms of the process of approval, unless it was an individual who worked for me and I was approving their expenses.
If you can understand the question I'm putting, because I'm not, in terms of the micromanagement, in terms of policy in relation to financial controls.
Yeah. So
you would have a role, and the financial controller would have a role to make sure, in the first instance, that those financial controls are robust, and in the second instance that there is compliance with them.
Yeah, there's two aspects, I suppose, Deputy, to the role. There's the necessity to ensure that you have appropriate policy, and that role ultimately falls with the governing authority of the university. So our travel and expenses policy is approved by the governing authority. So that's the policy.
I understand
piece
that.
of it. So in terms of operationalising the policy, the responsibility rests with every employee. Everybody must comply with the policy.
But the answer to my question then is yes, that both the financial controller and you as Director of Finance have a very strong role in relation to making sure that financial controls are robust and are being complied with.
In the general sense,
yes.
Not in an
General
individual
sense.
claim sense.
Yes.
In a general sense.
Yes.
So what we do is we take the policy.
Yes, is yes the answer?
In
general sense,
we have to ensure that procedures are put in place to implement the policy.
Thank you for that. So we have an obviously robust and strong role to play, and ultimately the buck will stop with the President as well.
Yeah.
And that's fine. So if there was system failures or process failures in relation to financial controls, where would the responsibility lie?
Well, are you saying in relation to expenses?
Well, if for example it was found that there was breaches in financial controls, if the standards were lax, if there was difficulties and problems, would it be the case then that in part would be down to the fact that the people who are responsible for making sure that the financial controls were robust would also have to be held to account as well? Would that be fair?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a weakness or a breach of a control can arise. It can be identified in different ways. There are people responsible for the implementation of controls. So, as I outlined, the expenses administrator is responsible for ensuring the controls are followed. So, if that person identifies a breach in controls, they would refer it appropriately. There are also instances that might be identified through an audit, where something was identified that this control didn't operate in this instance, and in that case then either the likes of myself or other people with responsibility for controls would look at how we can implement improvements to our process to make sure.
Well, my point is that if it was found in any institution, certainly in your institute, if there was systems failures or process failures, governance failures, financial control failures in relation to expenses or money being spent generally, then there would be some responsibility for yourself, for the president and for the financial controller in the institute, because ultimately the buck stops with yourselves in relation to making sure, as you said earlier, that the systems in place are robust. That's all I'm trying to determine.
Yeah, we have a responsibility to make sure that the systems and procedures are in place and implemented.
And that brings me then to the allegations then that were made by the persons A, B and C, and then all of the complaints that were made. What we understand is that there was an internal review carried out in the first instance, isn't that? And you just went through this with Chopton MacDonald. So just
in relation to person A, Deputy. There was the process followed with persons B and C was different.
And this internal review was carried out by the financial controller, was it? By
Director
you,
of Finance, myself.
By you.
Yeah.
And the financial controller had a role to play in it.
In terms of retrieving records and things for me, I was looking for information.
And isn't that part of the problem then? Because how is it possible that a person who ultimately would have to take responsibility for failures is also the person then who is carrying out an internal review? Because you would essentially be saying that, well, you would have to point out potentially, if you were to uncover that there was systems failures, that was in part your responsibility. So how is it possible for an internal review that would look into financial controls failures could be carried out by the Director of Finance and the Financial Controller? How would that be perceived as not being a conflict?
Yeah, so I suppose two things just to say in relation to that, Deputy, that as I said already, the expense claims don't all originate in finance. So none of the allegations related to expense claims that were made by staff in finance itself.
That's not the point.
Yeah, but just to make that.
No, we understand that.
Yeah, so it's looking. You're not necessarily looking at you're looking at what was claimed, and the claim originated out of other parts of the university.
Yeah.
So, in answer to your question, the Mazars review.
I have to hold you there, because at that point we had no.
No, but I just wanted to make a reference to a recommendation in the Mazars review. Yeah. Mazars reviewed the process as Deputy MacDonald identified. They identified that they recommended to us that in conducting such processes that we should conduct them by somebody individual.
And can I then bring in the HEA, and this is my final question on this issue, and I'll come back to the second issue. Given now what has been outlined, and in the last number of sittings where other institutes are in, and I raised an issue of a separate internal review into a different issue in another institute, would you be now satisfied, Mr. Love, that internal reviews in institutes is the best way to examine issues which are brought to the attention of the HEA in relation to allegations by whistleblowers or whatever it might be, if there's allegations of bad practice in institutes? Given what we've seen here and in other instances, would you not now see that it would be not wise to have internal reviews in the first instance?
I think to answer the Deputy's question directly, I think in certain circumstances external validation or review is appropriate. I do believe that, and we've had that discussion.
And would you say that would be the case then in most, that as a matter of practice now, that would be better if they were external rather than internal?
I think it depends on the circumstance and what the findings of some of the internal ones are. In certain cases would in some cases warrant it, and in other cases not. And in some cases, internal processes that are handled well, that remove people with direct responsibility. Sorry, I'll speak to the microphone, but invoke, external parties to do some of the validation and investigation would be appropriate, and in other cases, a full external is required.
Okay.
I would agree.
My second question, I'll be very quick on this, is just to get clarity from Mr. Barry. How many spin-out companies would there be in your university?
There'd be about two, an average of 2 per year. I think they're all listed in the financial statement. What page, John?
Page 34.
On page 34 of the financial statement is a full list of our subsidiary companies and companies in which we have a shareholding. When a spin-out company is established by the university takes an initial shareholding in that company, and all such companies are listed there at the bottom of page.
These are the ones that are there at the moment, so you're saying there's two. So what would
an average of 2 per year.
2 per year, okay. What would be the average percentage shareholding that the university would have in these companies?
The common practice at the moment in the university is to take 15% of the initial shareholding. The way in which a spin-out company develops itself as a company is to seek investment by venture funds in return for share capital, so that over a relatively short period of time, if the spin-out company is showing any signs of success, the initial shareholding is considerably diluted by the addition of external funds which are necessary to develop the company beyond.
Well, that because I've been through this with other institutes, and I'm asking for specific reasons. So what I'm hearing from you is that the average is 15%. It can be diluted if the venture funds require it and so on, but on average you would try that would be around 15%. So who then would have responsibility for management of conflicts of interest, for protecting the interests of the institute or the university in your organisation?
The Vice President for Research.
Vice President for Research. Can I stop you there for a second? So Vice President for Research would have obviously a governance role. Would there be any situations where the Vice President of Research in your institute was a director or shareholder in any of these spin-out companies?
No.
Why not?
Well, I know that this issue has come up at all the meetings, so it's just a fact that the answer is no. No dean, vice president, president, head of department, head of a research centre has any shareholding in spin-out companies at the university.
And if the head of research in your institute was a director and shareholder in several spin-out companies in your organisation, would you see that as a conflict of interest?
I would see it as a major potential conflict of interest, and we have a policy on IP and the commercialisation of IP, which is developed in line with the national guidelines of Knowledge Transfer Ireland in this regard, and it specifically mentions the potential for conflict of interest where a member of management, for the want of a better term, is involved in the commercialisation of IP.
Thank you for the answer. I can just, Cathaoirleach, can it be noted by yourself and by the Secretariat that both in terms of the UCC President and UL President, that both have said that it would be their view that there would be a strong conflict of interest if the head of research, potentially, if the head of research in their institutes was a shareholder in multiple spin-out companies located in their institute, and just want that.
Point is well made, Deputy.